Welcome back to the Exponential Athlete Podcast. This episode is a deeper dive into the alter ego effect, which is a concept, a tool that I touched on in the Kobe Bryant episode on his mind and breaking down the Mamba mentality. So I wasn't super satisfied with my description of the alter ego effect there. And since I did that episode, I read this book on the alter ego effect. I listened to some podcasts. I did a little bit more research to be able to understand the topic better so that I could present it to you in a little bit more of an effective way. So in this episode, we're going to focus on a couple things. So I'm going to give a light summary of this book. It is not intended to be a replacement for this book. It was really good. It's by this guy, Todd Herman. And I learned after reading the book, after doing all the Kobe Bryant episodes, that Todd Herman was the person that created the Mamba mentality with Kobe Bryant. He was a consultant for Kobe. They worked together. And the book was a great resource, but he also had a blog post about how they crafted that mindset and that alter ego together. So I touch on that a little bit at the end of the episode. But over the course of this episode, I'm going to focus on a couple of things. So first, who has used alter egos in the past? Next, what makes the alter ego effect work? After that, we're again going to talk about how you can craft your own alter ego. And then finally, we'll touch on how the Black Mamba alter ego is created for Kobe Bryant. I want to stress what this isn't. So again, this is not a replacement for the book. There's a lot of great exercises, and he goes in way more depth than I'm going to in this episode on how to create your own alter ego. I'm also going to try to have Todd come on the podcast at some point. I think we probably have to get a little bit more traction for that to happen, but I would really love his perspective on how anyone can use their imagination to create one of these very powerful tools. So first, who uses alter egos? So there's precedence for alter egos going back quite a long time. Martin Luther King described what many believe to be his alter ego as the distinguished self. And this is something that clearly helped him to make an unbelievable change in the world when it comes to equality, when it comes to individual rights. And it goes far beyond that. I mean, you see people who are celebrities like David Goggins, Beyonce, David Bowie, when they have to bring the best out of themselves, whether it's on stage, whether it's doing something difficult, they're relying on these alter egos that they've created. So David Goggins has Goggins, Beyonce Knowles has Sasha Fierce, David Bowie had Ziggy Stardust. And then, outside of celebrities, there's also athletes. And this is what we really want to focus on here is how are athletes using alter egos to get the most out of themselves? So we talked about Kobe Bryant and the Mamba mentality. We also have Bo Jackson, which I was surprised at. So Bo said that Bo Jackson never played a down of football in his life. It was always his alter ego, Jason, who he got from Friday the 13th. We also have people using it for different reasons, like Niger Morgan and Calvin Johnson. They used an alter ego when they were in press rather than when they were on their field of play. And I think that that's really interesting is that Calvin Johnson, Megatron, on the football field, he was himself, but it was uncomfortable for him to do the interviews, and that's when he would turn that alter ego on. We also have other ones like Ron Artest, who changed his name to Meta World Peace, or we have Chad Johnson, who changed his name to Ocho Cinco. Those are maybe extensions that go beyond what's the normal realm of alter egos, but they're definitely within the same domain. And then we have people like Cam Newton or Michael Vick who embody the same alter ego. They both believe as themselves as a Superman-like figure. And Michael Vick even has a Superman tattoo on his hand. And probably the best use case or the best example of an alter ego was Brian Dawkins. So his alter ego was Wolverine. He was called Weapon X, and he even had a separate locker for his alter ego in the Philadelphia Eagles locker room. And he did a lot of things, if you research him, that really embody how effective this could be. He completely transformed who he was on the field. He had this whole process of turning into Weapon X when he was playing, and that helped him to be one of the most feared defensive players in the NFL for quite a period of time. What might be surprising to you is that you've also probably used some elements of an alter ego. You just haven't realized it. So you might be a little bit different. You might talk differently. You might have different mannerisms when you play with your kid. You might be different when you present in front of a company meeting. You might have different patterns of speech, or you might embody a different persona when you're talking in class versus talking with your friends. Something that people have mentioned to me is that when I podcast, when I was in grad school or undergrad, when I was talking in class, I sounded completely different than when I was talking to my peers or hanging around. The words I used were different. My intonations were different. My body language was different. And now I've sort of met in the middle where I pretty much always talk like how I talk on a podcast. But there was stark differences in my, representation in those different areas, and I didn't even realize it. I also found that in those domains, I was very effective. And I think one of the reasons is because I was playing the role of a student. I was playing the role of a good speaker, and that helped me to succeed in those domains. There's other areas, even when you were a kid, if you were pretending to be a superhero, you were role playing with your friends. Those are aspects of the alter ego effect. And what this book is about, what the whole concept here is about, is how do we harness the things that we're already doing, taking on roles of other people, to improve our performance, to reduce anxiety around a specific event. How do we make that really work for us? So the first thing I want to touch on is why even have an alter ego? People create alter egos to create distance from something they struggle with, or from something that would seem unattainable for them with their current capabilities. This helps people to compartmentalize and be essentially unencumbered by the outside forces that are impacting their ability to perform in their chosen domain. So it's not just that, though. It goes much deeper. Having an alter ego can give you more motivation. It can help you perform essentially flawlessly. It can help you embody great performance and optimize that performance. And it has a whole host of other effects. All the effects are completely dependent on the alter ego that you create, right? You're creating this other persona that could be whatever you want it to be. So by changing at the identity level, we can more easily develop new habits, beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors that align with whatever we'd like to happen. So this alter ego effect is based off of what's known as the Batman effect. And here's a little excerpt from the research of what the Batman effect is. So the Batman effect refers to the finding that children perform better on a challenged task if they pretend to be someone else, such as Batman, who would be good at the task. Previous studies have shown that children who pretend to be a competent media character persist longer on boring tasks and perform better on executive function tasks than children who think about themselves as a first person. Taking the perspective of a person more competent than themselves allows children to reflect on the problem and think about it from different angles. It creates psychological distance or mental space between themselves and the challenging task and helps them to imagine a role model. Although previous research suggests that the Batman effect is a useful strategy, it has been largely unknown whether it's more useful for some children than others. And then here's another little excerpt about this effect and why the alter ego effect does have some scientific backing. Although the embodiment of fictional personas might seem like a gimmick for pop stars, new research suggests that there might be some real psychological benefits to the strategy. Adopting an alter ego is an extreme form of self-distancing, which involves taking a step back from our immediate feelings to allow us to view a situation more dispassionately. Ethan Cross, professor of psychology at the University of Michigan, has led much of this research over the past decade, showing that even small shifts in perspective can help people to gain control of their emotions. In one study, participants were asked to think about a challenging event in the future, such as an important exam, in one of two different ways. The group in the immerse condition were told to picture it from the inside, as if they were in the middle of the situation, whereas those in the distance condition were asked to picture it from afar, as if they were a fly on the wall. The differences were striking, with those taking the distance viewpoint feeling much less anxious about the event compared to the immersive group. The self-distancing also encouraged greater feelings of self-efficacy, the sense that they could proactively cope with the situation and achieve their goal. So again, it's not just about mitigating stress or feeling like you can handle something. It's also about improving performance and optimizing that performance. So this next section is called Alter Egos 101, and this is how someone can go about creating an alter ego that can help them for whatever specific goal they're trying to achieve. So the first thing you have to note, though, is that there is a specific goal you're trying to achieve with the alter ego. The alter ego is not something you would necessarily use all the time. You're going into a scenario to try to get the most out of it. An example would be Kobe. He is going in with the Black Mamba alter ego to dominate on the basketball court and to create distance from what's happening off the basketball court. Any athlete can do that in their chosen domain. If you go on the tennis court, if you go on the jiu-jitsu mat, if you go onto the golf course, if you go onto the football field, that is your chosen domain of focus where you want to play. It could also be something like presenting or even podcasting for me. I could have a podcasting alter ego where I'm embodying someone that is articulate, smart, can read quotes really well. Any of those types of things can be very effective. Also, the more specific and the more creative you can be, the better. And when we talk about the Mamba mentality and how that was created, you'll start to get a little bit of a sense of how creativity might have played a role in that, especially for Kobe. Again, these are high-level steps for creating the alter ego. This is no substitute for the book. The book goes into way more depth and has really actionable exercises for each of these steps. This is just whetting your palate, letting you know that this is an option for you. If there is something very specific that you struggle with on the court, it could be in normal life. It doesn't have to be sports related as well. So the first step of creating an alter ego is figuring out what you would like to achieve. So maybe I want to be a more communicative, a more expressive podcaster. I know sometimes I tend to droll on. I don't use my hands well. My intonation is very monotone. Maybe that's something I want to improve. I have to figure out how I would embody those characteristics at some point. The next is figuring out what the field of play is. So it's clear that within this domain of podcasting, when I turn on a camera, that is probably going to be my field of play. When you're a basketball player, the basketball court in a game might be your field of play. A different field of play might be the basketball court in a practice session. If, for example, if I'm a golfer and I really struggle on the closing holes, maybe the last 3 holes of a tournament, my field of play might not be the golf course, it might be those last 3 holes. So getting very specific with where the thing you're struggling with is, and isolating and creating a very specific field of play can help you excel in that domain. The next part, which was probably the biggest eye-opener for me, was in the book he calls naming your enemy. So essentially all heroes, they need a villain. And if you can very concretely describe and articulate who your villain is or what your villain is, you're able to, 1, identify it when it happens, but 2, create even more distance from it. So we're not just creating distance by naming heroes, we're creating distance by also naming villains. And so maybe, my villain in podcasting is that monotone. And when I hear it in myself, I start to think of the villain and I naturally want to push against that. I naturally want to go and do something that is opposite of that villain character. In my personal life, which maybe you don't care about, my villain is apathy. My villain is laziness. My villain is essentially not using and leveraging the resources I have at my disposal to make the most of my life or the situations that I want. And there's a very specific person from previous in my life who embodied all sort of those bad things. And I essentially just used that person's name as the villain in my own personal life and motivation. And that's something that has been a complete game changer for me over the last couple of weeks since I've read this book. Next is we want to identify what exactly we would like to achieve in that field of play. So we might have this goal. Maybe the initial goal is that I want to be a more articulate podcaster. But the specifics of that is, okay, I might want to have more intonation. I might want to use my hands better. I might want to use better examples. I might want to do very specific things within that domain. And I have to identify what those things are. After that, after we've identified what those characteristics are, we can create an alter ego or find an alter ego that matches, that is someone or something that does those characteristics. So an alter ego doesn't have to be a superhero. It can be someone real. A golfer can have an alter ego of Tiger Woods. It could also be something completely made up. It could be an animal. It could be a physical phenomenon. It could be a hurricane. It's only limited by your imagination, effectively. And once we've figured out who that alter ego is for that specific defining event, we can go in and create a backstory, or we can read up on the existing backstory of who that person was to gain inspiration to be able to live and be that character. You think of method acting. You look at Christian Bale, who's incredible at that. He becomes the person that he is acting. Alter ego effect is essentially method acting. It's very interesting to view it in that way. The next thing that we do is we look at a ritual or a totem that brings the alter ego into the real world. So I don't know if LeBron James uses an alter ego, but he throws the chalk, he gets into the zone. That is his ritual for starting a basketball game. We can have a trigger or something like that that brings us into the moment. A lot of people have tattoos. A lot of people in football or anything like that will do a dance. An example, I don't know if he had an alter ego when he played, but Ray Lewis would do the dance when he came out of the tunnel that would show that he was ready and got him in the game zone. A lot of players have tattoos of their alter egos, and there's a whole host of ways to do this. Totems, physical, tangible things help you bring that person into the reality because it's something you can touch and feel. But I also like the idea of ritual because you can do that anywhere. You don't necessarily need a tangible thing that in theory you could lose. And the last thing, which is very important, is practicing being your alter ego. It's not just, in competition, I'm going to try this out. You have to practice being your alter ego, not in competition. You have to practice being your alter ego and doing the things that they would do and acting how they would do in normal situations. So you know exactly what it feels like to embody that overall. With that being said, let's go in and talk a little bit about why Kobe felt the need for the Black Mamba and why he sought out help to start creating that, and some of the things that he tried to embody with that alter ego. So again, Todd has a video as well as a blog post around how him and Kobe created the Black Mamba together. I highly recommend reading that. I highly recommend reading the book. I will leave all the links to those in the show notes. But Kobe reached out initially to Todd's mentor because he felt like he was losing his edge a little bit, especially with the allegations off the court that were going on during that time period. He felt like that was bleeding into his performance in basketball, and he was starting to lose his identity because of that. And so Kobe was able to create this new identity that embodied exactly what he wanted on the basketball court. And what did he want on the basketball court? This shouldn't be a surprise from the episodes we did together. It's one, intentionality, so being very deliberate about what's going on in his performance and play. Attention to detail, obviously something that's huge for him. Playfulness. So there were rumors from multiple players that Kobe would slither on the court. He would hiss at you like a snake. And, there's playfulness associated with those types of things, but playfulness is one of the things that can also unlock some of these altered states like flow. Of course, we'll do another episode on flow states and also hopefully on what they call clutch states later in the future here as well. And then the last thing that he wanted it to embody was intense focus and energy. So again, from our previous research on Kobe, there's very few that could focus like Kobe could. There's very few that brought that sort of crazy energy into a basketball game and could change it. So something that's important to note, though, was that this wasn't created in a single session. Kobe built this alter ego over time, and he iterated on it over time. You don't have to come out of a conversation. You don't have to come out of this podcast saying, I have this alter ego and it's done. You got to evolve with your alter ego. You got to continue to build that story. You got to have a lot of fun being creative with who you want that alter ego to be and who you want to be when you are in that alter ego. And the last part of this is that Kobe did have a ritual. So in a podcast that I saw him do, he talks about how he was very inspired in the movie Gladiator when, I think it's Marcus Aurelius, picks up the dirt and he like feels it, and that is him recognizing that he is in the Colosseum. It's time to do work and to do that. And Kobe also felt like he had a moment like that before games. So he would try to get into the cage with the Mamba and let the Mamba absorb him, the Black Mamba absorb him. And that's a little bit different than a lot of people who are trying to create distance. But if you think about Kobe, that's something that he probably relished and embraced, becoming that or being engulfed by that. And he's mentioned quite a few times how he liked to embrace the dark side when he was on the court, especially getting that tendency from his mom's side. But that also goes to show that you can make the alter ego what you want. You can use your imagination. You can use your creativity to build it into whatever you want. Kobe would also listen to the Halloween theme song just on repeat before the games to get into that zone. That was one of his psychological triggers. Just looking at the Black Mamba and all the things we've learned from the other episodes, it's not surprising why Kobe 1 was really drawn to this, but why it was very effective for him. He loved storytelling. He loved poetry. He loved the Joseph Campbell stuff, the hero with 1,000 faces. His life was revolved around storytelling and him creating a narrative for himself. He got to leverage his creativity, his imagination to create this other alter ego. He got to build this whole story, and then he got to embody that. I would imagine that was a really fun and exciting experience for him to craft this and put it out into the world. It's a creative endeavor for him, and he really thrived and succeeded when he was leveraging the creative part of his mind, when he was tapping into this imagination and this very unique skill set that he has. So that is where I'm going to leave it. Hopefully that gives you a good understanding or a high-level understanding of the alter ego effect. I cannot stress enough that this is a good book to read if you're really interested in this effect overall. I will leave a link to that in the show notes, as well as the other podcasts and stuff that I listen to. I will say that is also an affiliate link. So if you do purchase the book through those, I get a small kickback. It's a couple cents, but anything helps to support the podcast. If you want to support in another way, if you share this podcast with just one person, that would mean the world to me. That's the best way to spread these ideas, as well as to start creating better athletes all the way around. So thank you again, and I'll see you on the next Exponential Athlete.